Hi, I'm Londa. Subscribe to my channel here on YouTube to save yourself money and to get rid of any and all stress as you learn my how-tos for creative sewing. The most important part of your sewing machine is the needle. Honest to gosh, it's the needle that's the most important thing. You really should change your needle with every single project. I don't care if you're doing the same kind of fabric and the same kind of thread all the time. You need to change your needle with every project. Just stop and think of what the needle has to do. It has to easily and quickly penetrate through the fabric, how many ever layers that is. It needs to interact with the hook that's coming around, and these loops of thread need to interact, and all that has to happen every single stitch. So if your needle is dull or not the right tip configuration to get through that fabric, then you are putting stress on your sewing machine. You don't want to stress your sewing machine, do you? So you want to use the right needle for every project. Now, needles come in many different types. I swear by Schmetz needles. That's Schmetz. You can see it here on all of the packages in my needle collection. Here is my needle collection. I have universal needles, I've got stretch needles, I've got denim needles, I've got microtex needles, I've got twin needles, I've got metafill needles. They're all different kinds of needles. And then in addition to the different types of needles there are sizes within each needle. The smaller the thread, the lighter weight the fabric, the smaller the needle you want to use to get through that fabric. The heavier the fabric, the bigger and fatter needle that you need in order to get through it. Doesn't that make sense? Okay, so let's just talk about different fabrics and what kind of needles you would want to use on different fabrics. Now, there is such a thing called a universal needle. Do you see that I have storage of any of my needles in there?
No.
This is a brand new item that I'm holding up here. This is called My Pad. A lot of times I have started to use a needle, but I haven't used it long enough that I feel like it goes into my prescription bottle of garbage needles. That's how I safely dispose of them. So I want to store it, but I want to store it not with the brand new needles. I want to know that it's partially used. So this is a great way of putting your needles in the right category and the right size within the category. A universal needle is kind of a hybrid. It's a cross between a sharp needle and a rounded tip needle. It came out when knits became available, and the regular needle that they had for woven fabrics was skipping stitches on knits, so they came out with a needle that was kind of a hybrid. It's not sharp, it's not rounded point, and it kind of works on all fabric, but to me it's not the best for any fabric. So I am not a fan of universal needles. If you are, that's fine, but I'm a connoisseur of sewing, so I want to treat my sewing machine the very, very best I can, and I want to get the very, very best stitch. So I will use needles specific to the type of fabric. Here is a cotton quilting fabric. My needle of choice for a cotton quilting fabric would be a microtex sharp needle. You also don't want to put any bigger of a hole in your fabric than necessary. So I would use, in this case, I've got a lot here, microtex sharp in a size 80. A size 80/12 is really your basic needle.
Action.
So on the packages of needles, down here is the size. There's a European size and then the American size. My brain just thinks all European sizes, but the equivalent to an 80 is a 12. You need to just start to have your brain think either the American or the European. So middle of the road size is an 80. Since we do a lot of stitching here on cotton fabrics, that's why I have a lot of microtex sharp needles in a size 80. If I were going to sew on a really lightweight fabric like this printed chiffon, I would choose, again, a microtex needle, but I would go much, much skinnier to a size 60. Lighter weight fabric, skinnier needle. But what about knits? If I were going to sew on this activewear knit, I would probably choose a jersey needle. Now there's also ballpoint needles. I like jersey needles or stretch needles. I was taught that a ballpoint, and it actually says ballpoint, is really only necessary if you are sewing on girdling, and I don't know anybody wearing, much less making girdles any longer. But I have learned that for fabrics like swimsuit fabric, activewear that has a lot of lycra in it, that the jersey needle is probably the best. Since I sew on a lot of knits, I use a lot of stretch needles. So that is a needle with not a ball at the end, but rather just a rounded tip. It wants to separate the fibers of the knit instead of piercing the fibers of the knit. And that stretch needle comes in a size 90 or a size 75. You'll see here I've got a bunch of 75s started and no 90s. Again, you always want to use the smallest needle that works on your fabric. And I have found even for this Ponte double knit that the size 75 stretch needle works just fine. If it were having trouble getting through all those layers, then I could go up to a size 90. But for a lightweight jersey, t-shirt type knit, definitely the 75 stretch would be my needle of choice. At the other end of the spectrum, here is denim. If I were doing hemming on jeans, I would definitely then choose a jeans denim needle. That needle has a very sharp point, and they come all the way from size 70 up to 110. So this is where I store the needles that I feel still have some life to them. This is just a wonderful new product. I think they're $11.95, and of course I have them here on my website. But along with this, I ship this needle tag identifier. On the Schmetz needles now, you will find not only color coding on the needle shaft for the type of needle, but also the size of the needle. So here for an example, let's say I hadn't had this My Pad yet. I could look at this and see that the very top bar is gold, so that tells me that it's a stretch needle, and that the very bottom bar, I don't know if you can see it, but right here is an orange color, so that would mean it's an 80. So this is a stretch needle, size 80. Isn't that great that it's labeled? Now, all of this labeling is just a couple of years old, and there are a lot of older needles out there in the pipeline. But if you start to purchase Schmetz needles, order one of these My Pads from me. I'll throw in one of these hang tags, so you keep that right by your sewing machine. You will have an exact way to identify and store your needles. Remember, some kind of way to separate your needles and keep them all organized, and then a safe way of disposing of your needles. But again, the most important part of your sewing machine is the needle.